hand over to Gabriel, who is a poet and essayist, and for the purposes of this crowd, she's also a lapsed scholar of classical reception. With Andrea Abi-Karam, she co-edited We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans poetics for Nightboat. She's the author of Kissing Other People, or The House of Fame with Rosa Press, and A Queen in Bucks Country, also with Nightboat. Kay is an adjunct instructor at NYU and a member of UAW Local 7902. And Kay has been a really incredible speaker, interlocutor, and part of the Queer in the Classical since our seminar series way back when, in that kind of cold pandemic winter. So over to Kay with 10 Maxims for cultural work. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me? Great, amazing. Thank you, Marcus and Nicolette and Eleonora, for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here. I want to flag one tech problem that I'm having. My enter key on my computer is broken, so I can't use the chat on Zoom like at all. So in situations where I might try to respond to someone in the chat, I can't do that. But I will do my best to vocalize things or whatever. It's been really annoying. It's wonderful to be here. As Marcus mentioned, I'm no longer a classicist. I'm a trained classicist. I'm no longer a classicist. I don't need to kind of tell you guys things that you probably already know about, like the reasons why people exit the field. That's not super interesting, I think. What I do want to talk about today, so I have not much to say about the classical side of the queer and the classical equation. Although if you poke me, I probably do have opinions. And I'm not necessarily gonna say very much concretely about the queer side of it, although there's probably somewhat more direct applicability of the stuff that I'm going to say there too. I do want to talk. I mean, I think we have like an hour and a half together, sorry, an hour 15 together, right? And so I'm going to talk for like 25 minutes. And then I think we should just like have a conversation. So I'm gonna sort of like limit the amount of time that I'm just talking at you, as opposed to all of us thinking with each other. The thing that I do want to talk about today is, like, let's see, my entry point is like this question that I think is an ongoing question. The history of movement work suggests it is an ongoing question. If you look at any period, it sort of suggests, oh, like wow, like this is kind of unanswered. Is like the question and problem of like, what does culture work do for what does culture do in movement work? Like that, like you could ask that as a question, right? Like and to get maybe a little bit more fine-grained about it, when we have if we have like the sense, and I think probably people here share at least part of this sense that if we are culture workers who are possessed by a deep sense of purpose and a deep sense of crisis, and a strong conviction that we are like living in a shitty world that doesn't have to be this way, right? Then I think that we're also going to operate on, like, we're also going to kind of start asking ourselves, like, oh, like, well, what does the thing that I do 40 to 60 hours out of the week have to do with my conviction that the world doesn't have to be this way, right? And that we can live in, we can produce collectively social relations that are whole and well and not violent, and characterized by plenty and equality. And I'm being a little ecumenical here, but I have some names for what this thing is, but I'm being ecumenical here on purpose, right? But so, you know, if we have this conviction, we have this sensibility, right? And then we also like maybe have the sense, oh, but for 40 to 60 hours a week, I am not working on that stuff. Maybe I do it on my days off, but I'm not working on that stuff. Instead of what I'm working on is like culture. So what? So question mark, right? And I guess I want to share, like, based on, I guess the way that I'll put this is I want to share the kind of the results of some experiments that I participated in and that have been instructive to me. And what I'm really hoping for the discussion is that you guys will say, well, these were some experiments that I participated in and they were instructive for you, right? And then we can just kind of collectively learn from this process of experience. This worked, this didn't work, right? These are the effects that I observed. So that's a little bit of preamble. The second little bit of preamble is the thing that I'm not going to try to do is lecture somehow at you guys nobody about like why classics is like good or useful for this moment. I mean, you don't need this, right? And I also don't think that it's like a good lecture. I've been in those lectures. They are like, they're usually dissatisfying and they are produced under conditions where, how to put this, like the keen sense in which we have to justify like studying the languages and literatures of the like northern half of the ancient Mediterranean world, as opposed to any other part, not to say that any other part is bad, right? The sense in which we have to defend that form of study, it occurs under conditions in which the university progressively, for all kinds of reasons, has squeezed humanities programs to defend themselves in these like more and more utilitarian terms. Although these are not, and these are kind of like austerity conditions, but they're not actually conditions of scarcity, right? I mean, and that's like really important, right? Like universities are, it's definitely true here. I'm gonna guess that it's true in the UK as well, are really skewed. They are not lean institutions. They are not institutions that are starved for funds, especially here. Private universities are bursting with funds, right? They are like, there are resources out there. We are just in a political conjuncture in which we have to defend ourselves, right? And that, so I don't actually want to make the case that there's some kind of like direct like one-to-one applicability between like the thing that you study, if it's like Lucretius or whatever, and like an actual kind of ongoing process of social change in the present. I want us to kind of like dispute the necessity of having to like answer that question at all under the conditions that it's proposed to us by university administrators who have like a shit ton of money to throw our way if they want it, or to throw in the way of anything other than like building a new campus to develop, like, for basically developing military technology, right? Okay, so that's not what I'm going to talk about. I am, however, going to talk about things that I think that culture work does, and should do, can do, and should do, right? And ways to, I'm going to say, allow ourselves to be part of a process, allow ourselves to be part of a process without sort of direct the kind of the instrumentalization of saying, and we have to be like really useful or something like that. Although ultimately like use is something we're probably all interested in. Just one further note about the chat. I'm just like not going to look at it while I'm talking because it's just going to distract me. But if you guys want to kibitz, you can. I'm just not going to see it. Okay, cool. So 10 maxims for culture work. I wrote them. There are 10. I'm going to read them. I'm going to talk about them, and I'm going to set myself a timer so I don't actually go over this limit that I set for myself. 10 maxims for culture work. 1, Because there are resources to do what we need to do, often in others' hands, maintaining and resourcing a vibrant cultural front is a task for the left. 2, this is because one capacity of culture work is to expand collective sense of actual, even if not imminent, political possibility. 3, there is power in a union, even for those not in the union. Organizing culture workers creates positive conditions for labor in general. 4, culture changes how people make sense of their conditions and does so faster than they can change those conditions. 5, culture work can help people think about emergent conditions in an emergent way. 4 and 5, just to flag, 4 and 5 are the ones I'm going to talk about the most. And 3, a little. I want to talk about unions. 6, if people not of the left have understood the efficacy of culture better than we have, then another tact is to understand, although likely not to copy, their example. 7, when the conditions of life are offensive, a clean conscience is neither likely nor very interesting. 8, if we sense that our ideas are circulating only among people to whom they're already familiar, then we have discovered a problem to which we need to develop a solution. 9, if the example is of primary importance for a collective sense of the limits of change, then culture transforms by bringing people and examples together. 10, all capacity is collective capacity, both synchronically and over time. Organizations hold the forms of consciousness that individuals cannot. I'm going to discuss these. If I had a working enter key, I would put them in the chat so you could see them. I don't. I will find a good way so that we can also. Marcus, could you make me a co-host so I can share my screen? Maybe that's the best way to do this, because I think that's probably it's maybe helpful to sort of see it. Amazing, great. Okay, I'm gonna do this. And okay. Give me just 1 second longer. Great, okay. Cool. You can see that I unfortunately think in Google Docs. Are we seeing this? Amazing, great, okay, fantastic. So, I'm going to go through this list as, let's say, efficiently as I can. The first point about resources, I just want to kind of emphasize once more that we need resources to do what we want to do. Sometimes those are in private hands, right? Sometimes that they are handed out philanthropically, they're handed out through funds, through nonprofits. That's not great, right? We all know the limits to that model, right? Or maybe we don't, but we should learn them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't need resources. We definitely need resources, right? And if we can get them, however we can get them, as long as that's not stopping us from doing the thing that we're going to do, we should try to get our hands on them, because the people we are opposing have resources that significantly outnumber ours, right? What's that Brecht has this song in The Mother that's like, they have their prisons and their soldiers, but in time they'll learn that these don't do them any good, right? So what do we need to do to get to the point where they learn that these things won't do them any good? We need resources, right? We need resources in part for culture work, because one of the things that very serious opponents of the things that we're trying to do, including right-wingers who are attacking us, on gender and sexuality, and who are tending to roll back like very serious concessions that people have been able to win over the past like 50 years, right? They have their hands on cultural organs. Right-wing talk radio, but also just like the nightly news, right? And so resourcing a cultural front is a task of the left. 2, this is because one capacity of culture work is to expand a collective sense of actual, even if not imminent, political possibility. What do I mean by this? I am just not interested in, and I say this as a poet, right? Which is a genre that is bursting at the seams with people who write all kinds of beautiful melancholic verse about how things are bad, in a way that maybe just repeats things that you can log onto Twitter and feel bad there, right? You can go outside and feel bad there. But I'm not very interested, and I'm also not interested in being a Pollyanna, right? I'm not saying like, oh, like my task is to make people feel better. There's drugs for that. There's all kinds of things that you can do if you're trying to be like a mood fix, right? There's entertainment, and maybe I'm trying to be entertaining too. But you know, like I'm just not interested in culture work that's basically melancholic, right? I'm not interested in the work of like grieving. Actually, no, being an Orthodox Freudian here, there is a difference between mourning and melancholy. And maybe I'm interested in mourning, but I'm not interested in melancholy. One task of culture work is to give people a sense of possibility, right? Of political possibility, even if it's not an imminent one. And it can do that by way of appealing to history, and it can do that by way of appealing to the present, right? But it's actually something that like poetry is really good at, is like dispersing a structure, a feeling of abundance, in which the kind of severe constraints that seem to really harrow us and to hollow out the present are not actually, some of those are like real constraints, and some of them are like, frankly, external impositions that we can do something about, right? And this is because one of the tasks of reactionaries all the time take it as their task to stamp out people's sense of political possibility. Like they do this very intentionally, right? And so one thing that I think poetry is actually really good at is transmitting a sense of possibility, right? Okay, 3, here's my point about unions. When I say there's power in a union, even for those not in the union, what I mean is that when we create like union density in cultural industries, and by that I do also mean like higher ed, you can say like journalism, absolutely, but also higher ed. What you're doing is like you are creating a constituency of people who, again, have their hands on media, have their hands on media and thought and the production of knowledge. And you are creating constituencies among these people that are basically pro-labor, because they have been members of unions and they have seen the capacity of unions to transform people's lives, right? I am a member of a union, and that union has transformed my life. Like the adjuncts union at NYU, one of the first higher ed unions in this country, one of the first adjunct unions in this country, won reappointment rights for adjuncts, such that if you teach the same course in a certain number of years, they have to reappoint you. If they don't reappoint you, they have to buy you out. They have to pay you what they would have paid you, right? That is job security that I previously as an adjunct didn't have, right? That's one example. but it's true for grad workers as well. I forget precisely. I mean, maybe you guys are members of UCU. I forget precisely how unionization works among grad students in the UK. In the US, if you're a member of a private university, if you're a grad student at a private university, only since 2016 have you had the right to organize, right? If you're a grad student at a public university, it's state by state. But again, that creates constituencies even among people who might go and work for, like, I don't know, like a pharmaceutical company afterwards. It creates constituencies who are pro-union. But this is especially keenly felt in journalism, right? Like, one thing that I think was true last year when we went through our like Striketober, when there were like a lot of people out on strike, but it actually was way less than like 3 or 4 years ago. There were about 100,000 workers out on strike in the month of October. 3 or 4 years, I think it was like 2018, there were 400,000 workers out on strike, right? But people weren't talking about it as a strike wave. There's all the kinds of things you can do with these numbers. And there's maybe not good things about like the height, but it is definitely good for media in general to talk about labor conditions in a positive way, right? That is something that can actually frame for people who are just walking around. Like, it just puts atmospherically, it's just like, oh, like, there's a union and it's good, as opposed to, I don't know what a union is, I think it's probably bad, right? Like, I think that this is just generally speaking a good thing. So like, one important thing, you know, like Jane McAlevey talks about like organizing higher ed and organizing education and medicine, like education and nursing and physician, medical assistants and things like this, right? And she talks about this as like a strategy, like a labor strategy. And I think a part of this like labor strategy for the left in general is like actually organizing culture workers, kind of for the reasons that I just described. 4. Culture changes how people make sense of their conditions and does so faster than they can change those conditions. I'm actually going to stop screen sharing now because I kind of need to see your guys' faces. Okay, what do I mean by this? There's this thing, it happens in poetry, but it's true elsewhere. Poets love to go like, well, you know, Auden says poetry makes nothing happen, and they end it there. Okay, that's number one, that's not the end of the line. Auden, the line goes, poetry makes nothing happen, it is a way of happening. So that's a different claim, right? The second is that if we're asking this question, okay, we know that poetry is not political organizing, right? We know that filmmaking is not political organizing, right? We know that research is not political organizing. That is to say, it is not, it's just a category thing. It does something else other than go to someone who is maybe not active in a process of changing their conditions and activate them and change their conditions. So that's what organizing is. Organizing is developing the power to change your conditions, right? And culture work does something else because it typically circulates among, but not always, circulates among currently activated people, especially when you get into more like, you know, let's say niche genres, like radical trans poetics, right? Niche genre, right? Maybe not that niche, but niche genre, right? But one thing that culture work does is among those activated people, it enables them to change their conception of what those conditions are, right? And that's true if you are in some kind of like art, like aesthetic genre whose purpose is not producing knowledge, right? And it's true if you're working in a medium whose purpose is to produce knowledge, right? Like, there's one thing that we are doing as culture workers is we are changing how people make sense of their conditions in ways that can actually enable them to change those conditions, right? Like, so this becomes like a part of the process, right? And that, I think you can't just sort of dismiss it because maybe I'm making a bit of a straw man. But I don't think I am, given like the sort of like the intensity of this position that like, oh, you know, like kind of like culture work does nothing. Maybe the sense that it's like a luxury, right? And then we have to kind of step back and think like, okay, like in all of this stuff that like movement work is doing, what culture work does is changes what, again, this is where it becomes important, that it changes and transmits a sense of possibility, right? That it, like one thing that it does, right? It helps people to produce both a realism of the intellect and a determination of the will, if I can just sort of riff. Cool. Okay. 5. Culture work. How am I doing on time? I'm not going to make it, but I'm going to get in as many as I can. 5. Culture work can help people think about emergent conditions in emergent ways. Okay, what do I mean by this? In 1977, Raymond Williams wrote an essay, published a book called Marxism in Literature. In this book, he introduced the category of the structure of feeling. You guys might be very familiar with this. What are structures of feeling? Structures of feeling are I'm trying to, Ruthie Gilmore has an incredible summary of it. What did she say? A dynamic narrative structure by which people understand the limits of change. So it structures of feel, and my read on the structures of feeling essay is that the challenge that it poses is basically a challenge about how we think about emergent conditions, right? As our conditions change, it is easy to think I am recognizing a pattern and therefore I know what will result, right? And that's not a foolish thing to think. There are patterns. We can predict stuff, right? It's not foolish, but it produces the attempting to think about emergent conditions in fixed ways can produce a sense that we absolutely know the forces that are continuing to change the fabric, like the social fabric under our feet, right? And actually, Williams's point is that because conditions are developing not in ways that they have always developed, they're developing in emergent ways. We can make predictions and we can sort of suspect and we can make good estimations based on history, but we like the idea that we are operating with guarantees, right, is false, right? And this was Stuart Hall's point about endorsing a Marxism without guarantees, right? We're not in this because we're not in this because we have made a wager that is definitely going to pay off, right? We are in this because we have a commitment to a world that we are aiming to produce, and as conditions change, we are trying to be a part of that process in order to win that substantially more liberatory world, right? Okay, so the challenge of the structures of feeling essay is to think, about emergent conditions in emergent ways. What do I mean by this? Understanding how the actually novel transformations of forms of experience that people transmit to each other and have en masse, and being able to work with those to understand how and why people will respond to their changing conditions, right? And this is so, and this is my claim. One thing that culture is really good at is working with people in this capacity, right? Is being able to reach people at the kind of edges of semantic availability and pull them into a place where they are moving together in some kind of direction that we sense is the correct one. Let me see if I can make that really concrete. Because I don't want that. I want that to like really land. Okay, I'm going to give two examples of this, and then I'm going to see if I can wrap this thing up. One example is that a structure feeling that I think is really dominant right now is I think that is paranoia, like and a kind of even like conspiracism. And I think that the pandemic made this like a lot like real like way worse. And that has to do with like people's experience of mass abandonment, of like especially like feeling abandoned, feeling like state capacity has failed them, right? And not knowing who to trust, and then responding to rapidly changing conditions from the perspective that, well, I see this stuff on the news, but I have no reason to trust these people. They are not on my side, right? If we think that this is just a right-wing thing, we have gone astray. It is a right-wing thing. The right wing has been very good at taking advantage of paranoia and conspiracism, right? But I had 2 students last year. I was teaching non-traditional students in the fall. They were both working class Black students from Brooklyn. And I asked them for examples of a situation in which they didn't feel that they had enough evidence to believe something that somebody said. And in this class of about 8 students, 2 of them said, well, vaccines, like the COVID vaccine. This is my example of something that I know that I've been told to get this thing, and I did not believe I had the evidence. I did not believe that I did not believe that it was right to get it. And I was like, okay, cool. Why did you get it? And they were like, well, I had to for school. Okay, so the point of this story is that these students who are not like of the kind of like right-wing constituencies that have like so benefited from paranoia and conspiracism, nonetheless deeply felt that thing, right? And if we don't understand this, that this is a motivating force that deeply changes how people are sensing and experiencing things, if we don't understand like this kind of like distrust of what like an authority figure on television is like telling you, it's like public health, you know, it's like we can stand back here and we can sort of say like believe science, like liberals love to say that stuff, right? But if we don't understand that this is like just like a mass experience of a conjuncture, we are going to fail. We are going to believe things like you can fact check your way out of a disinformation campaign, right? And we need to, we need to be that. So that is as an example of a structure feeling that we need to be like keenly aware of. In part because once again, the right is so much more aware of this than the left is. Okay. What's another good example? Let me offer a more positive one. Actually, okay, indulge me. I'm going to offer an example from my book, or from the book that Andrea and I co-edited. So we want it all, an anthology of radical trans poetics. Again, when I said earlier this is a niche genre, it kind of is. There are not that many people in this world who are self-identified political radicals. There are not that many trans people, although if you poll people, they're like, oh yeah, about 20% of the world is trans. Like if you poll people in the US, they're like, 20% of the country is trans. Less than 1, right? So which gives you a sense of like how, again, like a sense in which, you know, we're sort of dominating a narrative, but not under conditions of our own choosing. Okay, fine, but not that many trans people. Poetics, not that many people who are like perverted enough to go like, the thing that I care about in this world the most is poetry. I am one of them, but I know that I'm sharing a minority position. This book which Andrea and I put out there kind of as a wager, right? To say, well, we are interested in the work that people are doing, that we are interested in trans writers who are animated by both political and aesthetic experimentation, right? We are interested in how people are attempting to formalize conditions, formalize the kinds of political thinking that we find really exciting, right? We're like, okay, so this is an experiment. Like, let's see what kind of traction it gets. This book, for whatever reason, I mean, yes, we had like good publicity and stuff like this, but we tapped into something that people were desperately looking for. And I think that actually has a lot to do with the fact that like we put out like a book of political poetry that is not just like, wow, shit sucks. Like shit definitely sucks, but that's not the point of the poem, right? This is what I was saying about like transmitting a sense of like abundance, right? Transmitting the structure feeling of abundance. And then by like framing it in these terms, and then we wrote an introduction that was like, and the actual content here is like sexual liberation, gender liberation, abolition of prisons and policing, free movement of people across borders, an ecologically just transition, a world without private property or class relations. And like we took this thing where like people were like, I am dying for, I think, like people, I'm not going to say like, actually, I think it's a good thing. I think it is an advantage of this experiment that it's like a plus that people who are not transsexual communists read this book that was edited and largely written by transsexual communists, and we're like, oh, that's really cool. Like I think that the work that this does of like taking people who are just feeling like burnt out or depressed, or who are just like, wow, fuck Trump, that obviously was a big thing that animated people here for a long time, being able to take like those ideas and go like, yes, absolutely. And the content of these ideas is this particular liberatory vision. Like that is, and we're not just going to sort of didactically tell you that thing, we're also going to open you up to all these other like kind of like poetic experiments that can like, do some stuff with direct address, or do some stuff with the lyric, or do some stuff with serial poetry, or documentary poetics, or the poem containing history, whatever it is, right? That is and then people like really responded to it. It like gained traction, frankly, to a way greater degree and at greater scale than I would have expected. Even if you had like poked me right before it came out and you were like, what's your hope for this? And I would be like, oh, we sell it a print run. We are on the third printing. People teach it in their courses. It's in libraries, right? This is kind of going back to my point about resources, right? And I'm not just saying, oh, good for us, we did a good thing. I'm very pleased with it. But this was, let's say, an experiment in trying to be part of a process that worked out better than I expected. Way better than I expected. And has had, I think, downstream effects that I feel like I witness and can stand by. Not as an individual, again, but as someone who has attempted to work with people to make people both more effective and more determinate, more precise. And okay, I'm going to say one more thing, and then I do want to kick it over to questions. The final thing on this list was all capacity is collective capacity, both synchronically and over time. Organizations hold the forms of consciousness that individuals cannot. This is a different way of answering the question, why do we look at these cultural icons who were like really good 30 or 40 years ago, why are they all kind of like weird cranks now? Like I have some names in mind, but I'm not gonna say it here because it's being recorded, but I have some names in mind. And like Nancy is hearing a noise. Are you guys hearing a noise? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking. So I'm gonna, Nancy, it might be on your end. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just me. But you know, like, so this question of like, oh, why, basically like, why people who have these like great ideas, why do they go off in these like kind of crazy directions? I mean, frankly, I've sort of seen this a lot again over the course of the past 2 years. This is also related, I think, to like conspiracism and all kinds of stuff. And the answer that I have provisionally come to in this moment is, again, the thing that guides us as conditions change in emergent ways that we can't like predict or expect, and that sometimes like completely knock the wind out of us, is that we can do this collectively, but we can't do it on our own. Like, and that organizations, when I say organizations can hold the forms of consciousness that individuals cannot, what I also mean is that people produce like what I mean is that like movement, like culture work that's really well tied into movement work comes more out of organic relationships to organizations of the left and of the class than it does from singular individuals being really good at what they do, right? That's the claim. And in general, even for people who aren't like members of, you know, I'm not saying that you need to be like a member of like a left party or something, or of like a socialist organization, although or even like a union person, right? Although I'm like, you know, at this point in my life, like a really ride or die DSA bitch. Under these conditions, right? Like I think like large mass member organizations that are like actually able to like change people's lives also have these like other effects on like culture work that like align people around a program. And you can find all kinds of examples of this. The CPUSA in the 30s, absolutely. ACT UP would be another good example. Like people who were doing like really good like AIDS cultural production weren't necessarily members of ACT UP, but like the fact that ACT UP was like so involved in culture work meant that culture work in general was like really in tune with the AIDS rebellion. And I think, and then when you see some of these figures who get like, you know, someone in the chat just said like people lapsing into iconoclast, aging into bigotry, right? Totally a real thing. When you see this, I think it has to do with a weakening of organic movements, or at least a weakening of their relationship to organic movements. So this is me going, once again, all capacity is collective capacity. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. And now let's just talk. So thanks for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kay. That's so incredible. And what an